So wonderful to be back and to see everyone here to resume learning. I have to say, while I was away, one of the things I missed most significantly was this wonderful chaburah and our shared project of Talmud Torah together. So I think in my absence, everyone learned Kosev, so I just thought it made sense in discussion with Adam. And by the way, let me take this opportunity to thank Adam for managing and keeping the chaburah going in my absence. And actually, even when I'm here, it only exists, I can't say this enough, only exists in his first. So thank you, Adam, sincerely, for everything that you do. And particularly while I was away. So I thought it made sense that we should learn the melachot of Mochek just in terms of completion of Kosef that was learned. So I suggested starting at the Mishnah. The Mishnah in Daf Ein Gimel Amud Aleph, and the Mishnah says, it lists the Avos Melachos, and it says amongst the Avos Melachos HaKosef Shtei Oisius VaMochek Al Manas Lichtov Shtei Oisius. HaKosef Shtei Oisius, the one who writes to Oisius, and HaMochek Al Manas Lichtov Shtei Oisius. So like with many melachos, there's a symmetry over here. There's the creative melacha and then the unraveling of the melacha, and both of these are listed as melachos. Much like, for example, Boina and Soisa, building and destroying, or Mechaber and Mavir, lighting a flame and extinguishing the flame, or Kosher and Matir, creating a knot and unraveling the knot, etc. There's many melachos which are two-way, both creating the melacha and unraveling the melacha, or undoing the melacha, are both deemed the melacha itself. Now, Tosfos already points out, and then signposts us at the end of the Tosfos earlier in Lamed Aleph and Beis, that not with many of the Mishnah isn't consistent in its use of language. With some of the unraveling melachas, it links it explicitly to the constructive melacha, and in other cases it doesn't. So in our scenario, it says Mochek has to be almanat lichtov shtei oisius, has to be in order to write to oisius. Whereas with Boina and Soisa, it doesn't say Soisa that destroying a building has to be almanat, livnot, in order to rebuild a new building. So it doesn't always directly bring the symmetry. On some occasions it does, on other occasions it doesn't. And Tosfos in Daf Lamed Aleph and Beis suggests a theory why that is. But either way, in practical halacha, we see from the Gemara earlier that some of the other melachos are also symmetrical in this way. So, for example, Sosa arguably has to be almanas livnos, or arguably Mochek doesn't have to always be almanas lichtov. So all I'm pointing out for the purposes of melachos Mochek, we're not learning all the melachos, is that the Mishnah says that Mochek has to be almanas lichtov, and we, as the reader of the Mishnah, are unclear as to whether the Mishnah means to say that that's the definition of Mochek, or it's an example of Mochek. Is this a condition in being chayav, or is there some other reason why you need that? So, what would that be? Why would you need almanas lichtov? It could be because that's the definition of the melacha. The definition of the melacha is clearing paper in order to write on it, and the melacha should be viewed as preparatory to kosev. Or it could be because there's other reasons why you need almanas lichtov. For example, we know that melachos have to be constructive, not mekalkel. So maybe if it's not almanas lichtov, it would be mekalkel. But indeed, if there was another reason why you were mochek that was positive rather than destructive, that would also be sufficient. That's one theory of why you might need almanas lichtov. Well, there's another theory of why you might need almanas lichtov. There's a general machlokas about whether we just learn the melachos from the Mishkan, or do we even learn the purpose of the melacha from the Mishkan? We call the purpose of the melacha sh'tzricha l'gufa, and there's machlokas where the melacha that's eino tzricha l'gufa is chayv or not. So each melacha has a guf melacha, a primary purpose for doing that melacha. And this is a machlokas Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda that we're not going to go into on this occasion. Maybe the Mishnah here is listing what the primary purpose of the melacha is, which would then be caught up in the debate about whether you always needed that. But certainly for us who paskan, even melacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa, even if you're not doing it for the primary purpose, is also and even chayv perhaps. The Mishnah wouldn't necessarily need almanas lichtov. So just to summarize, the first chakira that we have is what is the melacha of being mochek? Is the melacha of Mochek erasing? And there are side conditions, like many melachas have, of ensuring that it's constructive and it's done for specific purpose and so on. And that side conditions is what the Mishnah lists when it says al manas lichtov. That's possibility number one. That mochik is its own melacha, like every other melacha, like creating a fire, like plowing, like cooking. There's a melacha called mochik, but mochik has to be constructive, not destructive, like all melachas. It happens to be that when you're talking about plowing or sewing or cooking, it's obvious how it's constructive. When it comes to mochik, there's a number of conditions about what the appropriate purpose for mochik is, but in and of in itself, the definition of the melacha is simply mochik. Erasing information is a melacha. Just like creating information is melacha, erasing information as long as it's constructive is melacha. That's possibility number one. Possibility number two is no. The definition of mochek is the heart of melacha, the very defining feature of what mochek is that it's al manas lichtov. What would be the logic of that? Well, the truth is the Mishnah is made up of lots of clusters of melachas. So even though there's 39 melachas, they group themselves into orders of practice. So, for example, the first 11 melachas are referred to as sidura de pat. Sidura de pat, the bread making process. You plow, you sow seeds in the ground, you harvest the seed, you grind the seed, tochen, you mix it, losh, you refine it, bora, and then you bake it or cook it, mavashal, and then you end up with pas. So we've got 11 melachas, which are sidura de pas. One of the siduras of the Mishnah is the sidura of writing. What goes into the order of the melachos of writing? Remarkably, killing animals, skinning them, parchment making, tanning the skin, etc., and then finally writing. So this is all part of the melachos of the Sidura de Kesiva, the melachos of Kesiva. They're separate melachos, but they're sort of structured in the Mishnah as part of the writing process. Sidura de Pas doesn't mean you're only chayiv if you're making bread. If you sow seeds in order to get carrots, that's also obviously the melacha. If you cook meat, that's also the melacha. But the way the Mishnah structures it, and we spoke about this on previous occasions, is it sort of aligns it with a particular industrial need, a human need. And similarly, the Mishnah aligns or structures a Sidura de Kosev, a series of melachos on Kosev. And these melachos are all preparatory to Kesiva. So maybe Mochek is I mean, it certainly is part of that Sidura, but maybe the essence of the Melach of Mochek is preparing paper for writing. And you can prepare paper or parchment for writing by tanning skin and leather production, or you can prepare paper or parchment for writing by doing Mochek, because that clears the old writing in order to put new writing on there. So maybe the essence of the Melacha of Mochek is Amanas Lichtov. It's not just a side detail in Halacha that the essence of the Melacha is Mechika, and you have to be careful to do it in a constructive way. But no, the essence of the Melacha of Mochek is clearing space for writing as part of the family of writing Melachas. I don't want to go too far off tangent now, but I simply want to remind you of things that we discussed previously when we learned melachos, given that, at least from my point of view, we haven't done melachos for a while. We did muktzah for a long gap. But basically speaking, there is a tension, in a sense, between how we understand the concept of melachos. The melachos derive from the Mishkan, and in the Mishkan, they were not done for bread production. They were not done for, the harvesting of animal skins was not done for writing purposes. The writing that took place, as you know from having learned Kosev last month, was writing on the boards of the Mishkan in order to help you structure the Mishkan properly. The leather production that took place in the Mishkan was nothing to do with writing. It was done in order to prepare the skins that was spread across the Mishkan. The cooking that took place in the Mishkan was done in order to cook herbs that were used for the dyeing process, for the coloring of fabrics process. So that which took place in the Mishkan had nothing to do with the basic human functionality. We, human beings, took the 39 constructive activities that took place in the Mishkan, and you sort of have a meeting, in a sense, almost a Tosh Ksav and Tosh Pair. The Mishkan, you have the 39 melachos done for one particular set of purposes. We humans have 39 basic needs, which cluster broadly into 4 families of melachos: the human need for food, which we call Sidura de Pas, the human need for shelter, which is all the building melachos, the human need for garments, which is all the weaving and fleece of sheep and combing and threading and making garments and so on. And then the human need for information, which is Kosev, it's the whole family of Kosev. Very interesting, by the way, that we think we live nowadays in an information age, but in the structure of Chazal already, the way they structure the melachos, there's 4 human needs. If you ask people what are basic human needs, most of us would say 3. We need shelter, we need food, and we need clothing. But there's a 4th human need, which is information, and that's the family of the melachos of Kosev. So there's a tension between these 2 ways of thinking about the melacha. For example, if you're looking at how it's done in the Mishkan, the name of the Av Melacha is Mavashal, is cooking, boiling, because they were boiling herbs. If you look at how it's done in Siddur the Pas, the name of the Av Melacha is Choresh, or is Ofer, or baking. So just to summarize, what we looked at when we learned previous melachas, every time we looked at the previous melachas, was looking at a tension that lay between how you define the essence of the Av Melacha. What makes something a melacha, it turns out, is really two criteria. It has to have taken place in the construction of the Mishkan, but it has to then align with a basic human need. If it's not if it's not constructive, or it doesn't align with the basic human needs, then it doesn't qualify as one of the 39 melachos. And we saw the Mishnah lists them not in the order of the Mishkan, and not with the names of the Mishkan melacha, but with the human order and the human names. Thus, the Mishnah lists the ha'ofer, for example, baking, rather than hamavashel, even though they're both the same category of Av Melacha. Nonetheless, the Mishnah adopts the surah. So why am I mentioning all this? Because Mochek is part of the Sidura, part of the order of information melachas, of writing melachas. And the Chakira we're asking is, what is the essence of the melacha of Mochek? Is it erasing and writing? Is that the essence of the melacha? Or preparing parchment for writing in a different way? You prepare parchment for writing in one way, or paper for writing by creating paper, creating parchment, and you prepare parchment or paper for writing by erasing in order to prepare it. What's the Chaz of the melacha? When the Mishnah says, Mochek Manas Lichtov, is it defining the melacha, or is it saying, no, the essence of the melacha is Mochek, and this is just a side condition? The second bit of Chazorah I want to... I'll pause it just if anyone has any comments, and then I want to the second bit of Chazorah about melachas, since we're a little bit out of the sugya of melachas. The second bit of Chazorah I just simply want to remind everyone of is that there are 39 Avos melachas. There are other melachas which are referred to as toldos. The concept of an Av and a Tolda, the terminology, sounds like we're saying a sort of parent and a descendant, as if the Tolda is just another example of the Av. That's not correct. A Tolda is its own shem melacha, its own name, own category of melacha. It just is subsumed within the larger family of melachas of Avos, but it's its own type of melacha. So to give you an example, again, one that we learned when we did the previous melachas, there is a melacha called zorea, sowing a seed, and there is a Tolda, which is zomer, which is pruning. Why is pruning also melacha? Because it's constructive, it's creative, it's a significant human activity, and it engenders growth. That's why we prune. It's a Tolda of zorea, because both zorea and zomer are engendering growth, but it's its own shem melacha. When you're pruning, you're not putting a seed in the ground and causing the seed to germinate and grow into a new product. You are doing something completely different. But it's a Tolda of zorea, but it's its own shem melacha. What's the distinction between whether something is a Tolda or an Av? So if Zomer is its own Shem Melacha, if pruning is its own category of Melacha, who cares that it's connected to Zorea? The answer is with respect only to a few halachas. So for example, when it comes to a carbon chatos is brought for a shogeg. Each melacha that you do b'shogeg has its own carbon chatos. So if I both write on Shabbos because I forgot it was Shabbos, and I plow on Shabbos because I forgot it's Shabbos, and I cook, I'll bring 3 chatos. If I also sow a seed, I'll bring a 4th chatos. If I also prune, I don't bring a 4th chatos, because pruning is a Tolda of the Av of sowing. So that's the nafkamina between whether it's an Av or a Tolda, but a Tolda is also its own shem melacha. And again, there's a reason why I'm emphasizing all of this, because we need to remember all of this when we learn the melacha of Mochek. So there are Avos and Toldas, and they each have their own shem melacha. Slightly more surprisingly is, there are sometimes co-Avos, or 2 melachas, which both are Avos, and yet are both deemed to be, they're different melachas, and yet they are both deemed to be under the heading of one of the 39 melachas. 2 examples of that, both of which we've mentioned, Ofer and Mavashel, baking and cooking. They are deemed 2 separate Avos, but they both are one of the 39 melachas, but it's not that one is a Tolda of the other. So they're both co-Avos, and yet they are one only of the 39. Or a second example of this is Zorea Notea, thank you. So sowing a seed and planting a tree, 2 melachas, 2 different acts. With sowing a seed is germinating. With planting a sapling, the sapling grows. And yet in both cases, I'm putting something in the ground to generate growth, and are therefore both deemed co-Avos under the category of the 39 melachas. Okay, so just to summarize the second point, because this is important as an introduction for everything we're going to be learning when we learn the melacha of Mochek. There are 39 Ovis Melachos. That's how we come into things simplistically. Before we learn the Sukkahs, we think told as a subcategory is the Ovis. Not correct. There are hundreds of Melachos that we're not allowed to do on Shabbos. These cluster into 39 categories, but they're each an independent Shem Melacha, and they cluster in two forms. Sometimes the relationship between them is primary and secondary. That's what we call Av and Tola. Sometimes the relationship between them is co-primary. But they cluster in 39 categories, but these are really hundreds of melachos grouped into these 39 forms for the purposes of categories of errors made on Shabbos, like a chatat and the like. And sometimes you have an Av and a Tolda, such as sowing and pruning, both of which generate growth, but in very different ways. And sometimes they're similar enough that they're deemed co-others, such as baking and cooking, or sowing and planting a sapling. That's the second piece of Hakdama that I wanted to give. First piece of Hakdama, as I said, that we wanted to give was that the Ovis Melachos come from the Mishkan and the 39 activities that took place in the Mishkan. However, we then align them with basic human needs in a unique way, and that's part of the Mishnah did. And we discussed on when we learned Melachos in the past, the tension between these two ways of thinking about Melachos. All good as quick chazara. I know not everyone was there when we learned melachot the first time, but that's a quick chazara. Okay, we're going to put on hold our question about what the essence of the melacha of Mochek is, and we're just going to learn the sugyas, and then hopefully things will emerge from that. So we turn to the Gemara on an Ayin Hey on the base, very short piece of Gemara. Tana Rabbanon, kos of ois achas. Tana Rabbanon, kos of ois achas gedola, v'yesh b'mekoma lichtov shtayim potter. If you write one ois, even though it has the place to write two, you're potter. Mochek ois gedola, v'yesh b'mekoma lichtov shtayim chayev. However, if you erase one ois, and there's in its space enough to write two oisios, you are chayev. This is the chumrah of Mochek over Kosev. Okay, so in these two lines of Gemara, there's an enormous amount that needs unpicking. So first of all, just the maths of what the Gemara says. The Gemara says that Kosev is only a melacha if you write two oisios. If you write one ois, it's not a melacha. Mochek is a melacha even if you erase one ois, as long as there's space to write two oisios in it. And then we have the addition of Rabbi Nachum, Rabbi Yossi, who says it's a choma b'mochek mi b'kosev. Turns out the mochek is more chomer than kosev. Actually, I'll start in a reverse order. Is that statement obvious that mochek has a chumrah over kosev? Do we understand that statement? It sounds ostensibly true, right? It's obvious. Mochek l'chayv even if you erase one letter. Kosev l'chayv only if you write two letters. Is that a clearly obvious statement?
I think it wouldn't be if we were told it, but
because, well, surely it's true. Mochek is more common than Kosev. Kosev only chayiv if you write two. Mochek chayiv even if you raise one.
Well, part of so we're not told. There is a statement that you're chayiv if you erase one letter and there's space to write two, but we're not told what space to write two means.
It's true. That's going to be another question we ask. What does it mean, space to write two? It's very unclear. But the concept that you're chayiv for being mochek one letter and only writing two letters does seem to be a chumrah in mochek over kosev. Mochek you're chayiv for erasing one letter.
If it wasn't for that chumrah, then you almost wouldn't need mochek to be a separate melacha.
Well, mochek is very different to kosev. Mochek is raising, kosev is writing.
But I think it's mochek almanach. Liftov, that's because you could in theory think erasing information is also something. If I have a star that says, or there's a star that I owe Edward £100,000 and I erase that star, that's very good for me, and that is losing information, and therefore you might think that that's the mochek that was talking about. Once it's mochek almanat liftov, then destroying enough space for two.
Okay, you're saying good words, and I'm going to come to them in a second. But again, I just want to zoom in on my questions. Since is Rabbi Yossi's statement obvious? Rabbi Yossi's statement obvious. Sorry.
I think that the Shiur of Mochek is defined as the character because it's all not to that. So
yes.
It's not really a chumrah with Mochek because the whole definition of the melcha is based on the space for writing.
Right. Right. Okay. So I'll come back to your point because your comment feeds into Rafi's comment feeds into yours, but again, the reason I'm asking this question here and starting with this, even though it's the last bit of the Gemara and we'll only get to it later, is because it ties into our previous discussion. If the essence of Mochek is erasing information, then indeed it turns out Mochek is more chomer than Kosev. Because with Kosev, I am only chayiv when I create 2 units of information, 2 letters. With Mochek, I'm chayiv even when I only erase 1 unit of information, 1 letter. However, if Mochek is simply preparatory to writing, and that's the nature of the melacha, then with Kosev I'm only chayiv when I write 2 letters, and with Mochek I'm only chayiv when I prepare the space for 2 letters. So in a sense, it's not really more chomer or less chomer. It's just different how the melacha sort of expresses itself. Because if Mochek is preparatory to erasing to writing, then really both have the share of 2 letters. Just Mochek, if I erase 1 very large letter, I've now got space for 2 smaller letters. Therefore, I've done preparation for 2 letters. Yeah.
In the straightforward understanding of this Mishnah, or Bryce said, when you say that it has space for 2 letters, are we understanding it? And he intended to write 2 letters.
Good question. Not clear. We're going to get to that.
That's all part of it.
Yes, it's all part of this as well. Yeah. The problem here is there's so much a jumble of information, and we're just trying to we've asked the highest order questions now. What is the melacha? And we're now just trying to see what clues we can find. And just in reverse order, just I thought it was interesting. Where this maybe is a clue in this area. Maybe that's indeed what Menachem Rabbi Yossi is saying differently to the Tanakhama. What's he adding? Yeah. Now, in what way could it be constructive to destroy information? So you're entirely correct, Martin. One example of constructive destruction of information is incorrect information or no longer relevant information, like an IOU. So if you erase an IOU, that could be constructive because it's no longer correct. I've paid the debt, or it never was correct. It was a mistake, or whatever it is. So certainly correcting mistakes could be constructive. Not every erasure is makalkel. But the chakira that we have over here is what's the nature of the melacha? Is it erasing, or is it the erasing in and of in itself, or the preparatory nature is part of the preparation for writing? And maybe that ties into the machlokas between Menachem and Rabbi Yossi, if there is a machlokas between at least what Menachem and Yossi is saying in his statement. Yeah.
Another case that might have shed light on that we don't seem to have is erasing 2 very small letters when you would have leave only room to write 1 normal letter, and what would that be?
Well, the problem is there's no example of that, because by definition, if you erase 2 small letters, there's space to write 2 small letters. Now, this is going to lead us into the next thing we need to discuss with what on earth is going on over here with small letters and big letters and everything else. But putting all those problems aside, by definition, if you erase 2 small letters, there's at least space to write those letters again, or other small letters, perhaps. Okay, so there's conceptually quite a lot that's confusing over here.
The idea with the statement of Yesh bin Koma,
Yeah.
a sort of proof for the need for Rabbi Yossi to make his statement, to say that you might be thinking that you've actually extended the idea of kavanah, because you're not saying the almanac means that you definitely have to have the kavanah to fill those spaces. You're just saying there's enough space so that you can identify.
Okay, so I think there's an important intuition floating around here that you're bringing out, Paul. It could be even if Kosev is destruction, just raw destruction of information, and therefore, or the other way around, let me say, even if Mochek is preparatory. So I said, well, if it's preparatory, then Mochek's not really more chomer than Kosev, because Kosev is writing 2 letters, Mochek is preparing space for 2 letters. But the fact is, I'm preparing a space where I could, in theory, put 2 letters in there, but am I actually going to write the 2 letters there? And if I'm not, then again, this could be a chumrah Mochek over Kosev. Then with Kosev, I have to actually write 2 letters. With Mochek, I have to make it possible to write 2 letters, even though I have no intention of actually writing 2 letters. And therefore, that ties into that, but perhaps that's what Jeffrey also alluding to, that confusion over here. Okay, so I want... Yeah.
Sorry, it's also how you translate the word bin kolon. Is that physical space, or
Yeah.
in its stead?
In its stead, yeah. Yeah, interesting. I hadn't thought of that, yeah. No, an interesting point. Okay. Okay, so these are the I suppose the high order questions over here, but there's also low order questions over here, which is just practically what on earth is going on in this in this Gemara. What on earth does it mean, the Shiur of Shtei Osius? So Yesh bin Koma Shtei Osius, any size, however small. So when it says Ois Gedola, you have a large letter, it just means larger than the very smallest font that humans are capable of reading or writing. Anything, even a tiny yud can have 2 smaller yuds fitted into it, maybe depending on the limits of human dexterity and eyesight. very unclear to know what's really what any of this really means. So here we turn to the Rishonim and see what they say. This feeds a little bit, I suppose, also into other questions about Kosef, which we're not going to go into now. But let's see Rishonim, and at the start of next year, I'll just mention some of the parallel questions around the melachot of Kosef itself, which are a little unclear. But we've done enough talking outside, so let's just do a little bit of learning Rishonim inside. So this question is really asked by a number of the Rishonim, and they seem to argue in their answer to this question. So the first question I want to see is the run, or the Chedushim HaMichosim La run. So the run is from the Spanish Rishonim, the generation after the equivalent to the generation of the Rashba, the Ritva, generation after the Ramban, 2 generations after the Ramban. This parish that we have is no longer viewed as belonging to the run, but to some other anonymous Rishon from around that time. So it's known as Chedushim Michosim La run. This is like Mochek Shtei. That itself is very, very interesting word. So you could have said, this is not like being Mochek Shtei. This is only Mochek 1 letter. But since it's Almanas Lichtov Shtei, that's enough. The Run doesn't say that. The Run says it's Havalik Mochek Shtei. It's like being Mochek Shtei, which again feeds into to what degree is Rabbi Yossi's statement non-controversial. Because if it's like being Mochek Shtei, then is he right when he says, of course he's right, in his conceptualization of the melachot, what he said makes sense. But is it unanimous that this is a chumrah in Mochek over Kosef? He says it's Kamochek Shtei. Even though you don't need that, you can write 2 large letters like those that you deleted, because by definition that's not possible. By definition, if you erase 1 letter, you can't write 2 same-sized letters. You need analogous to the ois that was written, that it should be average sized, and from the same type of text that he wrote, if he was writing Ashuris, but Nami Ashuris, you also need Ashuris. Ashuris is what we is Sefer Torah Ksav. So the Ilai ain't chayiv, but if it's not the same font, you're not chayiv. If you she'ein chamochik ois katana Ashuris, shalei b'gadei lichtov shtei ois b'ksiva she'ein Ashuris gegon mishk shalanu. So mishkas is script or block lettering that doesn't have all the complications of the formation of Ashuris. So the Ran says there's no letter, even the smallest letter, a yud in Ashuris can always fit 2 yuds in script, right? Well, 2 yuds in script. So you'll never have a letter which can't fit. And therefore it must be that when we say Gedola, we mean Shtei Osius, we mean of the same font, Beinonis of the same font that you've been writing in. Now, at this point, there is still confusion. Does Gedola mean the size of the font, or does it mean the size of the letter? Because some letters are bigger than other letters. An aleph, for example, is really about the size of 2 yuds and a vav. That's just the shape of an aleph. So all the Ran has said so far is that the deletion, that which you can fit in, has to be from the same font, but Beinonis of the same font. Does he mean Beinonis of the same font that I can fit 2 yuds in place of an aleph? Or does he mean that I can fit a larger letter? What do we mean by a large letter? Do we mean a larger font size, or do we mean a letter which happens to be larger? A W is a larger letter than an I in English, a aleph is a larger letter than a vav, or do we mean whether it's size 14 or size 12 on my Word document? So now the Ran carries on, and he's saying a second point over here, clarifying, at least for us, clarifying a second point. In Kain, my Gedola, he says, if we're not talking about the same font, the whole concept of Gedola doesn't make sense. Gedola means that you can write in the same font 2 osios that are merely average size from the same fonts that you deleted. Shemaya Aleph of the same letter that you deleted, yeah. Shemaya Aleph, Shemakim Lichtov Shtei Alfin Ben Onim. Vimhaya Beis, Shemakim Lichtov Shtei Beisin Ben Onin, etc. So the Ran says that the erasure means that you can write two letters of average size in the space of the large letter, number one. Number two, it has to mean in the same font, otherwise this halacha makes no sense. And number three, Gedol and Beinonis doesn't mean the type of letter, it means the font size of the letter. So you can fit in, for example, two alfin in the place of one aleph because it's a smaller font. That is the summary of the Ran's reading of the sugya. As of now, none of this makes sense to me, right? As of now, all of this is a mystery. If it's erasure of information, I've erased information. If it's that it needs to be constructive to fit other letters in, why shouldn't I be able to fit other font letters in or other size letters in? And if it's that the essence of the melacha is preparatory to using the space, then again, why shouldn't it be a constructive melacha that I can fit other letters in or other size letters in? So the Ran is very difficult to understand how tightly he delineates the melacha. We've run out of time, but in the next year, we will start with the Meiri who says Beinonis without the same provisos as the Ran, and then the Rosh who brings the discussion really, and the Rosh is going to both address our concerns over here and also begin moving us towards thinking better about what Mochek is, because the Rosh brings the Tosefta that says even if you erase a blob of ink, you could be chayiv mishum Mochek. So that's tishtush dio means a dirt patch of ink, and that's what we'll start off with next time. And I'll also Belineda on Tuesday, yeah. And then Belineda, I'll also mention something about Kosev, sort of parallel confusion around the melachot of Kosev, which we should just carry at the back of our minds. Thank you very much, Rabbi Zobin. Really an honour to be back.
Next update of explain we'll have the program, but we'll finish about 9:40 because it's what